Welcome to the Florida Climate Educators Network presentation, Turning Up the Heat, the Impacts of Climate-Fueled Heatwaves on Floridians, with Miami-Dade County Chief Heat Officer Jane Gilbert. To find out more about the Florida Climate Educators Network, please refer to the slide at the end of the presentation. This video begins as FCAN Director Scott Lewis is about to introduce Ms. Gilbert with a reference to a PBS interview with Dr. Michael Mann. During the interview, Mann discussed the links between climate change and several devastating events that have unfolded this summer.
And Michael Mann is a scientist, some of you probably know him at the University of Pennsylvania, and talking about the relationship of climate change to the heat we've been having, to the terrible fires in Maui and some of these other areas, and the trauma that we've been experiencing this summer because of this kind of thing. So I'm going to stop sharing here and let's see, introduce Jane here in a second. You can see all of you. So we're very excited to have Jane presenting today. And I first met her in her role when she was Chief Resiliency Officer for the city of Miami. Met her a few years ago when I was actually doing some advocacy work for a group, the community groups, the Sea Level Rise Solutions group. And we talked a little bit about some of the work that group was doing. And I got to, then shortly after that, I think, she took this position as a Chief Heat Officer for Miami-Dade County. And I got excited about that. And she was kind enough to give a presentation to a national group, advocacy group that I was also involved with at the time. In her job, and I'll read some of her job description so everybody is familiar with that. And her job as Chief Heat Officer at Miami-Dade County, Jane is responsible for improving coordination and accelerating existing heat protection efforts and initiating new work that reduces the risks and impacts of heat stress and extreme heat for vulnerable communities in Miami-Dade County. On behalf of Miami-Dade County and Resilient 305, the Chief Heat Officer will develop and launch a multi-stakeholder climate and heat health task force to analyze existing conditions and vulnerabilities and identify strategies to address current and future impacts of extreme heat on human health, lives, and livelihoods. From her LinkedIn site, Jane describes herself as an advisor, connector, and accelerator of public and private partnerships, ventures, and policies that address climate resilience. For over 30 years, she has led organizations and initiatives within the private, public, and nonprofit sectors in the field of environmental risk management, social entrepreneurship, education, arts, community development, and urban resilience. And I just wanted to give you a couple of examples from her resume. I think, she's got such an interesting background. I wanted to share a couple of these with you. This was sort of a recent thing where she was the executive director. I guess it's Oolite Arts. And I don't know how to pronounce oolitic limestones. I always get that wrong, but anyway, I think it's Oolite Arts. And Miami, Fort Lauderdale, where it was formerly the Arts Center of South Florida, as she was responsible for successful financial, programmatic, and reputational turnaround of this nonprofit, offering subsidized artist studios, art education for youth and adults, and exhibition programs. She facilitated a strategic planning process that resulted in renewed public and private support to the organization. She was also the business development environmental manager at Cultural Survival in the Boston area, where she supported the startup of an entrepreneurial trading venture in non-timber products from tropical rainforests, directed research and writing on the market potential of economic plant species, and developed guidelines for sustainable harvesting of forest species for the USAID. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. This is a really interesting variety. I don't know if tonight we have any art teachers on here, but we need to recruit a few for this effort. So Jane, please take us into some of your world there.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott. It's really a pleasure to be amongst educators. I have great respect, and particularly given this is the startup of a new year, you have very busy schedules, whether you're in the classroom or have kids in a classroom, whatever you're doing, it's a busy time. So I appreciate everyone joining this evening and for Scott inviting me. One of the experiences that you didn't mention is that I was the first executive director of Dream and Green, that has the Green Schools Challenge and works with schools across South Florida to with lesson plans. And I encourage you, if you're not part of the Green Schools Challenge and you're in a K through 12 school, to consider it, because there's all sorts of great resources and lesson plans there. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started from the beginning. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yeah, great. Okay, so yes, I was hired by our mayor, Danielle Levine Cava, to address the increasing health and economic risks associated with extreme heat here. So we're going to talk about the current and future risks, who's most at risk, because it is very unequal in how heat impacts our communities, what Miami-Dade County is doing about it, and a little bit about what you can do. And I'm going to try to get through this real quickly so we can, because dialogue, question and answer is my favorite part of any presentation. So heat is the leading weather-related killer. It's more than hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. And if you look at excess heat-related deaths, it's more than all of those combined, globally, nationally, and here in South Florida and in Florida. It's not only because in Florida, our combination of chronic high heat and humidity can cause a heat-related illness, but it also can bring on a heart attack. It can bring on a psychotic episode. It can make you dizzy and end up in a traumatic injury. It can exacerbate lung conditions, diabetes. There's a lot. For pregnant women with high heat exposure, it can result in negative birth outcomes. The good news with all of this is that heat-related illnesses and deaths are preventable, and through not only our education and outreach, but other assistance that we provide to help people manage the risk as well as mitigate our urban heat. That's how we can manage it. And I'll get into some of the individual populations, but our average minimum temperature, this is Miami-Dade County, but if people are in South Florida, if they go to the Southeast Climate Change Compact, they have the average minimum temperatures for Broward County, Palm Beach County, and Monroe County increases as well. And it's been about 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And minimum temperature is important because if people can't cool down at night, it's more dangerous. And that's since 1985. But because we're always so close to 90 degrees, we've had this dramatic increase in days over 90 degrees since 1970. And as we move forward, our heat indices are getting into the extreme and dangerous zones of a heat index of 100 and 105. Historically, not only since 1971, but even in the last 14 years, we've had an average of only 6 days of heat index where the heat index reaches 105 or above. And this year alone, we've had well over 40. So we're well on our way to that 3 months of the year with a heat index of 105 because of this is an unusual year. Hopefully it won't continue at this level, but we don't know. And it's getting hotter, not only because of climate change, but how we develop as cities. This is true globally. The more asphalt, more built environment, less trees, less vegetation, more waste heat from cars and buildings, all of this contribute to resulting in about up to 10 degrees difference between our urban environments and our natural ecosystems. And it's distributed very unequally. This is a map of Miami-Dade County. And on the left is our census blocks by census tracts by median income. And the whites are the lowest median income. And on the right are our urban tree canopy coverage by percent, and the whites are areas are less than 10% tree canopy. So you can see how much it aligns by socioeconomic demographics. And we did a study. We looked at the heat-related emergency department visits and hospitalizations by zip code in Miami-Dade County. And the disparity is pretty high. We have certain zip codes that have over 4 times the number of emergency department visits and hospitalizations than other zip codes. So, and the strongest correlating factors of the zip codes with the highest rates of illnesses is high percentage of poverty for the hospitalizations. That's because of the social determinants of health. When you have so many different factors they're struggling with, that can lead to much more severe heat-related illnesses. And emergency department visits, daytime surface temperature was the highest correlation, followed by outdoor workers. And then what's important for all of you is households with children 5 to 18. Because kids are in camps, in sports, in recreating outside, and they're not necessarily aware of all the precautions they need to take, it's pretty common that kids can have heat-related incidences, mostly exhaustion. God forbid that it's a heat stroke and is fatal. So we mapped our vulnerability in the county. The other compound risk is with hurricanes and a widespread power outage. We all saw that with Hurricane Irma in 2017 when we lost 12 people in a nursing home. Luckily, the state passed a law requiring all nursing homes, assisted living, to have the generator power to keep a community room cool for 4 days and have the fuel for it. And that's been enforced pretty well across the state. But we know that there are a lot more people that would be at risk. So as Scott mentioned earlier, I was charged with putting together a task force. We had the woman in the picture there is Dr. Cheryl Holder. She's an internist that has spent her career working with vulnerable populations and teaching medical professionals to work with vulnerable populations. And she's a major also climate advocate. She launched the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. So she's really working with healthcare professionals around climate education. But she was my co-chair. And then we had representatives from the National Weather Service, university partners, our state health department, community-based organizations, municipalities, different departments within the county, and people with lived experience from the vulnerable communities. We had 15 members. The 2 citizen members were selected and given a stipend to participate. And then we had a series of like 6 workshops that invited everybody, the public, anyone who wanted to come and provide input. And that's really, we resulted in this like collective action strategy where we have all those players involved in the recommendations in our action plan as partners. So these are all people who are involved and people who are part of the solution for our extreme heat action plan. It's organized around 3 goals. We have 19 actions. I'm not going to get into them in detail, but one area is all around our heat season campaign, informing people, lots of different trainings, summer camp providers, cooling site staff, disaster volunteers in the community. We're now doing a series of trainings for employers, for outdoor workers, and seeking some protections for outdoor workers. The next goal area is helping people cool their homes affordably, efficiently, and with minimum impact to our greenhouse gas emissions as possible. So we're expanded our weatherization programs. I was on call today with a private investor who's going to help us out with some high efficient AC units for a low income population. And we want to make sure our evacuation facilities and cooling centers have the backup power necessary to keep people cool in the event of a widespread power outage. And the last one is the long-term strategy, is really how do we mitigate our urban heat islands, bring more green, bring more trees, cool pavements, cool building materials, less waste heat, to not only mitigate our urban heat islands, but pretty much all those solutions also either sequester carbon or reduce our emissions. So just a couple of things to think about if you're working with kids or young people, or just yourself or your employees. It's pretty much can be dangerously hot outside anytime from May to end of October here in Florida. So you want to make sure you have cool drinking water on site. If you're exerting a lot of energy, you have to introduce electrolytic drinks at some point. It's about 1 every 3 or 4 drinks, or you could actually be fully hydrated and still have heat exhaustion. Happened to my daughter, in fact, so I emphasize that one. Shaded and cool areas, you want to make sure that the kids take breaks, get sunscreen, etc. Some pretty obvious things, but it's just things to think about. Also good to know, I'm not going to get it, there's way too many words, but the Zachary Martin Act was passed in the state of Florida for all high school athletics because Zachary Martin was a high school football player who died of a heat stroke in football practice. And it requires all athletes and coaches to do a virtual training to make sure that they're monitoring the temperature using a wet bulb globe temperature, and taking certain precautions under different thresholds. So it's just something to be aware of, that our state does have good laws on that. And unfortunately, we do not have any protections for our outdoor workers, which we have many, but we do have some protection for our high school athletes, which is a good thing. So with that, this is my website, some resources to know, and please sign up for our newsletter if you're interested. But that website has all the vulnerability analysis. It has our much more detail on our extreme heat action plan and what we're actually up to. And I'm happy to answer any questions about our specific actions in any of those goal areas. But I like to get into conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing and let us do that.
Yeah, let's. Good. Thank you very much. That was wonderful introduction to the issue and some of your work there. Let me just check and see. Actually, you've been listening to you and not monitoring here the question and answers if we have any. We have a.
Can also raise their hand if they want.
Yeah, if you could see, let me see if you can you see everybody, or you can scroll through, and maybe that's a good way to do it. If there are people that want to raise their hand, or they have that little reaction button at the bottom that people want to
Usually
do
if
a
they raise
virtual.
their hand, they move it to the main screen. I think I see Liliana. No. Or is that a different? No, that's my scroller.
I'm gonna look through there. And I'm gonna look down at the bottom. And
There we go.
well, I'll start off. I'll tell you what. Oh, David does. Go ahead,
Yeah,
David.
we have David and Mary. So
Scott, you want to go?
No, go ahead, please. I'm just waiting. I was gonna prime the pump a little bit, but I'm glad you're.
Yeah, sure. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I think my camera's backwards, so sorry, I got back from an exercise. Hey, everyone. Jane, so nice to be here with you. And just to confirm, I'm here in country. There's a beautiful orchid right there up on that tree. So here I am in Dade. From an educational standpoint, I'm very interested in the unique way that heat can impact certain people, the non-obvious ways. And Miami's flat. I should say all of Florida's flat. It has no snow. There's no state income tax. And in certain areas, we have great medical centers. And so people with disabilities are uniquely called to this place. And I wonder what the chief heat officer thinks about that opportunity. Because, for example, some people who are paralyzed, they're in a wheelchair, it looks like their legs don't work, and they also can't sweat. And they're at a unique risk there. So there's an educational opportunity, I think, here to talk about and anyone on this call can ask me about this, to educate about non-obvious heat risks. Yeah, Jane, if you have anything there, I'd love to hear it. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, David. We do include disabled in most of our messaging as people who are more vulnerable to heat, for sure. You know, I welcome recommendations on that front because I'll be honest, we didn't have a lot of input from that community in our plan development stage. So it would be helpful to think through, particularly, like, is there particular things we should do when there's a heat advisory or heat warning, like we do with our outreach to unsheltered and to messaging about cooling sites? We could potentially activate the special needs to get to cooling sites, transportation. You know, we do have that special needs registry in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, which is quite populated.
Yeah.
Yeah, very happy to help with that. From my research, I have come to the understanding that a lot of it, and this is in collaboration with NWS Miami, who I know you work with, a lot of it might just be population specific communication. So would really love to work with you on that, and also to help mobilize the community, because I come across that situation where those who have the most to lose often are the ones whose voices are the hardest to hear. And I have some solutions there. So
yeah, no, I think it's a factor of just how we were late to the game to focus on extreme heat itself. We, you know, we're known internationally for hurricane and sea level rise risk. But when you went out to the most vulnerable communities and asked them their top concern around climate change, it's extreme heat. It's not those.
Oh, that's actually great to hear, because from my research on people with disabilities, they actually don't see heat as a problem, which is a problem. So that's a big educational opportunity.
Well, that is a common problem in the general population as well, is making sure people understand the risks. Yeah, so let's follow up on some suggested messaging and suggested avenues for messaging. That would be great.
And I can link you with these people too, if you want them as lived experience advisors in these feedback sessions or workshops. I think you said. I can link you to some of the key players. Yeah. So
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you again, Jane. We had you about a year ago come and talk to us at the League of Women Voters Clean Energy Action. So
yes, I remember. Your name is quite familiar.
Yeah. Well, I am curious about the outdoor worker topic. You said your task force really didn't dive into that.
No.
Is there a reason they didn't dive into it? And on the topic, do you have some ideas on what we should be doing?
So good question, because, you know, at a state level, we had bipartisan support for a heat standard bill that came out of actually a representative and a senator in Miami-Dade County propose it at the state level, and it never made it out of committee. It made it out of one committee, but not the other, so it never was heard by the legislature 2 years in a row. So we're now looking at what we can do locally, right? I'm currently finalizing with our risk department a standard operating procedure for all 28 departments of Miami-Dade County, because we have a lot of probably over 5,000 workers that are exposed to heat, just Miami-Dade County. And then two commissioners have proposed an outdoor protection ordinance. The first reading was in July. That first reading, it passed unanimously to be heard at a committee meeting next month. It applies to construction and agriculture workers. And it would be, if passed as it is currently, it would be the strongest heat protection legislation in the country, stronger than the state ordinances that California or Washington or Oregon have, or I think Minnesota has one. So we'll see how that goes. Of course, we do work in a interesting state department where a state political climate where local ordinances have a way of getting preempted.
And we have no Department of Labor in Florida.
And we have no Department of Labor. But we are partnering with OSHA here locally on a series of trainings. We have some trainings at the end of the month. We did also with University of South Florida. We did a heat stress summit, prevention summit for employers in July. And now we're doing 2 with OSHA in English and Spanish at the end of this month, virtually. And to really try to just raise awareness for employers about what a good heat safety plan looks like, how it can improve productivity, actually reduce costs, and try to build it from an incentive base first. And we'll see if we can also achieve enforcement regulation.
Thank you for joining us today. Educators have a critical role in preparing our population to face a challenging future in the Sunshine State, helping Florida's children and adults become resilient in the face of climate change effects such as sea level rise, intensified heat, coral reef destruction, and increased flooding from storms. Such resilience not only includes becoming knowledgeable about climate change and its impacts but also creates opportunities to learn how we can adapt and even to mitigate its causes. Educators around the world are developing engaging activities to assist learners to prepare for climate change in their communities. We see prospects for Florida educators to participate in this enterprise by networking to share lessons and creative projects addressing climate change and its impacts in our state. We welcome you to join us and make contributions to this effort.